What would you say is the oldest nation in Europe? Let me know. But first we have to agree on what is a nation in the first place, because obviously if you look at like Catalonia and Spain, there's not really an agreement on what a nation is between lots of different peoples in this world. This is Ben Llewellyn, so we're gonna have a look at that today. I've broken down nation, the meaning of nation, into 4 different categories. Legal, or the state, the ethnic component, which is, but I know there's some dark blots in history with that, we'll dance around and tread carefully. There's the religious element as well, that connotation of the nation. And there's the cultural / linguistic element. So we're gonna look at these 4. What is the oldest nation in each of these 4 cases? San Marino, a microstate landlocked and surrounded by Italy, is smaller than Guir, a peninsula near where I live. Here it is in blue on top of it. It's small, isn't it? This was founded in 301, as several of you noted when I said I was gonna see if I could make a video like this. Now, legend has it that there was a saint involved and there was a monastic community, so it's vague and hazy, but we do know something came out of this time period in San Marino. San Marino has the claim to being the oldest state not only in Europe but in the world, as well as the oldest constitutional republic. But is that true? I mean, that's quite a claim, and the concept of nation in early medieval and post-Roman times was vague and hazy, especially in Italy, where you had layer upon layer of feudal lordships, the decaying Roman Senate, the ecclesiastical structures, and then later on, the signores, who were basically regional town lords by each minor city. So it's not clear-cut as to when this began, but we do know by the year 511 that San Marino had its own self-governing assembly, the Arengo. An interesting note I learned whilst making this video is that Napoleon in the 1790s was in the perfect position to wipe out San Marino, but he noticed it had a republican government, which helped this new model of republicanism in France gain credibility. So Napoleon allowed San Marino to exist to benefit his propaganda sources for, hey, the republican form of government is valid. Look what they've done in Italy. It made him look good. He was egotistical, Napoleon. There are 2 nations you've probably heard of, France and Scotland. Now, as Napoleon was being born, he did not come from France. He came from Corsica, the Republic of Corsica, which France later invaded. And another interesting note is Corsica's constitution had the first constitution ever written in Italian, even though they spoke Corsican mainly. As I said, France put an end to that, invaded, took it over, and within a quarter century, the Republic was being born. And I need to mention this because it was a shift in terms of how the French viewed nationhood. So, from this point on, they did not view Corsica as a nation. They did not view the Basques or the Breton as nations. There was only France, there was only French, and the purpose of being a nation was to delude difference and abolish what made individual locations unique, except for agriculture and farming, of course, in the pastoral and food sense. But in terms of cultural identity, everything about the nation became absorbed into the Republic. And this was a deep contrast to before the French Revolution, when it was cultural, even earlier on, cultural ethnic, explicitly with France. And the Republic was an exact opposite to this. It abolished that ethnic sense. All were part of this universal state, as long as they accepted they were French and nothing else. This is so different that they actually changed the French language. They had their own calendar at one point. It was madness. I don't know how many people died in the terror and so on, and the wars and the revolution itself. But it's such a break and a rupture in terms of how the French saw themselves, that having this new legal basis of France meant they were in many senses an entirely new nation from this point. And that's where I need to make a distinction between legacy and heritage and the national sense of unity. When you go through such a change that centuries from now this break is still a rupturous moment, that what came before is so different that that identity does not reflect who you are, but you're still the caretaker of that land. It changes what a nation is. What does it mean? And what do I mean? I mean these four categories that I'm showing you. Nations are not permanently stuck in one or the other. You can go from being an ethnically defined nation, like Nazi Germany was, into being a civic nation of laws, like Germany is. You can change, and that's exactly what France did. Not to the good of some, but that is what it is. Another legally defined nation of self-identity is Scotland. The Kingdom of Scotland formed in the year 814. Well after Bulgaria, by the way, which in 651 gained legal recognition from the Byzantine Empire that they were a state, a people, a kingdom, whatever you want to call it. And if you want to go in terms of legal recognition from another state, if that's how you define a nation, maybe Bulgaria is the oldest in that specific detailed sense. But I just need to note in Scotland's case, the unification of Scotland happened slowly, very piecemeal, but through the legal system. That's how they did it. And when they were unified into the United Kingdom, they kept their legal system, and that is what has kept Scotland so distinct as a nation. I don't think anyone would doubt that Scotland is a nation today. They were independent during the Renaissance. And having that legal system gives it a distinguishing feature that is, it's not quite the civic nationalism that the SNP wants. And it's certainly not an ethnic nationalism. And it's not quite a cultural one. It's a legal law profession kind of nationalism, which I think makes Scotland very unique, but they are not the oldest country in Europe. Ethnic nationalism. Now, I'm sure some of you are wanting to hear about the Basques, but look at this map here. Yes, the Basques have this DNA type that's quite unique, but it's scattered across the western coast of Europe, especially around the Bay of Biscay. And I can't stress this enough. DNA does not determine culture. And I know some people in my comments are just gonna, but just get out. I'm not interested in DNA as culture. Ethnicity, on the other hand, is different. Ethnicity and race are different. In Welsh, the word hill, which is race, had no negative connotation at all until the 20th century. None. It was a sense of pride. Welsh nationalism for centuries spoke about our British race, But our nationalism changed. Something happened in the 1930s and 40s, didn't it? Okay, let's go back before then. The Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was having trouble, it was destabilizing because you had this idea bubbling up in the 19th century of ethnic nationalism. You had the Croats, you had the Czechs, the Hungarians, the Romanians over there somewhere. You had the Slovenes, the Germans, all of this. But these were built upon older concepts of race, ones that did not include what we consider to be now. We in the West have fetishized the fluke level rare event of ethno-nationalism that Nazi Germany was, to the point that we have blown it out of all proportion and have now an inability to talk of European ethnic heritage without being called racist by some weird social justice obsessed blue-haired weirdo. We have the right to discuss our own ethnicity and our ethnic heritage without being called racist. And because of that, we're beginning to see coming back into older forms of nationalism pre-Nazi Germany, pre-19th century, into the idea that we need something that unifies us, that's not just this imaginary civic nationalism where anybody can be a member of us, it's not really important. But nations are important. That's where I'm getting at. And I don't want to go into DNA or race. That's not what defines a nation for me at all. But if you want to talk about that, the Sami up north in Scandinavia, the reindeer people, they're probably the oldest nation in Europe, if you want to go by that route. So let's go on to subjects that matter and not just ethnic divides. Culture and language do kind of merge and blend and overlap in some delicious Venn diagram that I'm incapable of composing. But what is culture? Ireland specifically makes this talk really difficult because they don't conform to any of this. Going back, they were just a patchwork of petty kingdoms and clans fighting over cows for centuries, basically, until the Vikings invaded. And you had a guy named Brian Boru who took upon himself the High King of Ireland title, which until then hadn't really suggested a nation, but more of like, I'm the guy that can climb to the top, right? He changed it into a sense of nationhood, Irish nationhood. He died in the year 1014, so around the year 1000, Ireland was beginning to have this idea of being an Irish nation because of the Vikings coming in. Now there were blendings, Irish married Viking, but because of the conflict, they had to unify, and I say unify in the loosest sense of the word. Over here in Wales, across the sea, Rome left us a nation, albeit a broken one, in the year 383. Very quickly we found ourselves attacked by something like 7 different nations, okay? As other parts of Britain began to be released from the Roman Empire as well. Irish slavers, Picts, Jutes, Angles, Saxon. It just didn't stop. That gave us a sense of unity, even though we were a quiltwork of kingdoms. A sense of ethnic unity, I would say. But it's the language, the Welsh language, which has been a common thread through our history, that has really made us a nation. Wales grew up out of the same age that San Marino did, because of a sense of self-awareness. But nations like Estonia, Romania, these nations' self-awareness came later. But there is one group of people I need to mention, of course, and that's the Basques, in this cultural nationalism. And we don't really know anything at all about when they became self-aware. We have no idea. But what we do know is in the 4th century, around the time San Marino and Wales were growing up into something, the Basques were not Christian, but on both sides of them there were Christians dominating. So what we think, or at least what I think, is that by this time, at the latest, the 4th century, the Basques had to have had some sense of self-awareness, because they worshipped a sky god and like earth creatures, which is completely at odds with Christianity. And this would have made them aware that they were a distinct group. So at the latest, the 4th century, the Basques, and across Europe, all the way up in the Baltics, we know at this time the Baltic tribes had a similar religion, not to the Basques but amongst each other, similar to each other, and they would have had a series of very similar languages to each other. They had this forest worshipping type religion, Romuva. We don't see any proof that they were aware of themselves in a nation type sense that early on. But around the year 1000, the Baltic lands saw a major change, similar to Ireland. The Vikings began attacking from the one direction they had assumed was safe. The Vikings turned the safeness of the sea into a terror. We see some sense of loose unity developing amongst them at this point to fight these Vikings. And Lithuania, the word itself, is first mentioned in the year 1009, which would eventually become the last pagan kingdom in Europe in the 1300s. Culture, Europe, old, early, what am I missing out? Who am I missing out? Horse, soldiers in its belly, the Iliad, Troy, the Greeks, right? How early were they unified? I mean, you had Alexander the Great, who came down from the north and imposed unity. But before this, they were just a collection of city-states. They didn't even have the same ideas of governance. Sparta was, well, Sparta, and Athens was a democracy. Others had different forms of council or inheritance among elders. But when they had to fight Persia around the year 500 BCE, that gave a sense of unity. But was that enough to make them a nation? Their ancient poetry seems to suggest that they were speaking in Greek in terms of geography or language rather than identity. For their identity, they mention their individual polities, not Greeks, except in context with Persia occasionally. However, Rome just rolling over them for centuries. Coming out of that, they were changed forever, and Constantine the Great moved his capital to Constantinople, and in 330 he made Christianity the religion, essentially, in this now Greek-centered empire. That was cataclysmic. The religion of their ancestors was gone, or going, and the geography shifted even from mainland Greece to the coast of Asia Minor. I don't think Old Greece and Byzantium Greece have enough continuation to be called the same nation. There is the legacy and the heritage which absolutely must be valued as caretakers. There is an inheritance there. But the nationhood itself changed so much before and after Constantine the Great that Greece was a different nation from that point forward, the 4th century again. Perhaps like the Basques, San Marino in Wales. And they have a neighbor, Greece, Albania. Albania we simply don't know enough about. Where they come from. Are they the Illyrians? They're on the coast there. between Greece and Italy. Their language is old, but whatever was there before, there's not enough continuation to know. An Albanian principality emerged in the 13th century, briefly. Then it was gone. Then they emerge again out of the mountains. So in this context, we don't have enough knowledge with Albania to know when they even came. We have less knowledge of them than we do the Basques. For those of you who want Romania to be the oldest country in Europe, I'm sorry. In modern Europe, it's difficult to find the religious sense of nationhood in the post-ethnic, ultra-civic context that we find ourselves in, but it's there. Former Yugoslavia broke up into 3 religious groups who defined themselves along these religious lines, with Muslim Bosniaks on a defensive ridge in the middle between other groups, Orthodox Serbs and more Catholic Croats. And these Croats and Serbs, they came from the Slavic waves of migrations, a millennia and more ago, of which the Poles were part of, further north, and their king, Mieszko, converted to Christianity in the year 966, which shifted Poland, a break in their identity much like Constantine the Great had given Greece. Before they were a semi-wandering pagan people, Mieszko changed that and turned them into a solidified Christian and expansive kingdom. But Poland is not the oldest country in Europe, by far. In fact, outside Bulgaria, most of the Slavic nations arose quite late. But if you're looking at it from a religious sense, if you go a bit further east, there's another nation that's not Indo-European, like the Basques, up in the mountains of the Caucasus, who don't have one Christian cross on their flag. There we go. Don't have 2 Christian crosses, 3, 4 Christian crosses on their flag. They've got 5 Christian crosses on their flag, just to make sure you get the point. They were the 2nd country in the world to convert to Christianity. In what century do you think that was? The 4th century, 327. This gave them a sense of unity, even though they had been there for, we don't even know when they got there. Millennia, perhaps? But this gave them a sense of unity that changed their nationhood to such an extent, whoever they were before was different. So that's one way of looking at it. And I would say Georgia, perhaps, is the oldest in Europe, if you include Georgia within Europe, according to religious nationhood. But which nation is the oldest? I've kind of alluded to my Cymru, Wales, of course, the Basques, San Marino, Albania, which is like, where did they come from exactly, when? Greeks, which have a valid claim, but again, Constantine the Great was a break in their history that's unbridgeable, perhaps. And Georgia, and Lithuania. Each of these have a claim that's valid, and don't forget Bulgaria's legal claim. So, which one of those do you think is the oldest nation in Europe? Let me know down in the comments. And thank you to my Patreons for contributing. Feel free to buy me a coffee, leave a super like, join on YouTube as a member, or simply like, subscribe, and keep watching. And as always, keep learning and just doing what you want to do to develop yourself into a better human being.